Greetings everyone, welcome back to Blade Bias. Today we are going to go over the key differences between the Prisma V1 and the Prisma V2. I guess this is technically the Prisma V2, Prisma Pro. I don't know. Apparently there's a naming convention that will be explained soon according to MachineWise, but we'll figure it out when it gets here, you know? So, what we're going to do is essentially just take a look because, even though they haven't come out recently, the intention is to keep the Prisma V1 around, and it's not every day. In fact, it's really, not very often that a company will keep their old product when they make a newer, better version of it. But the reason that happened is because they do end up being quite different to each other, despite all the comments that I've gotten on the Prisma Pro videos about people who claim that they know everything about MachineWise. It is more handle biased. I asked Dalen directly, and in fact, I will show you. Is the Prisma V2 meant to be slightly more handle biased than the original? A touch, yes. I had to blur out the next message because it kind of I'm not trying to expose any secrets here, but it is meant to be a more handle biased version. And when you pick it up and you actually flip them, the differences are subtle, but they are there. And considering that, again, these are both going to be available, I figured it would be pretty informative to make a video kind of comparing them and seeing which one that you should end up buying. So let's start off with the Prisma V1. Now, the Prisma V1 that I have is the first production. I think I got this from drop number 2 or 3. This is before they had the QC cards. This is before the blade spine was chamfered. So I'm not going to touch on any of that stuff, but just the flipping experience alone. This is definitely a balisong that feels like the weight is towards the ends. There's a lot more momentum in the flipping. The end of the Prisma carries a lot of momentum. And overall, I think the community generally agrees on the fact that the Prisma has just a little tiny bit of blade bias, especially when you take the weights out, but we'll get to that. And it can just make it a little weird for new flippers. Specifically, I remember Brandon, in his review of the Prisma V1, mentioned that he had some issues getting used to it. And that's something that I remembered having with the Vortex. In fact, it's the reason I sold the Vortex, because I see the Vortex and the Prisma as filling the same spot, but I prefer the Prisma to the Vortex. It's just ever so slightly blade biased. Chaplains feel just not as sticky as they do on the Pro. And a lot of its fun flippability from that momentum comes from the end of its handles because of the weights in the end. Prisma Pro or Prisma V2, on the other hand, yes, for all you commenters, they are the same thing, don't worry. Pretty much, they're pretty much the same thing. The Prisma V2 feels a lot more natural. It feels normal, a little more distributed. Chaplains, you can see I'm chaplaining about as fast as I did in the Prisma Pro. It didn't fall off nearly as quickly. It's just it feels a bit more normal, a bit more standard. It still has that Prisma charm, don't get me wrong. It is light and it is long. But there isn't that sort of weirdness where it feels like there's a ton of momentum being carried by the end of the handles, or that slight bit of blade bias. This is, for all intents and purposes, a fairly neutral balisong, if not ever so slightly handle biased. And for both of these, for the blade bias here and the handle bias here, we are talking about a tiny, tiny bit. Obviously, I figured I didn't really need to bring it up, but I feel like I should. The handles are very different. You can see the Prisma Pro seems a little thicker, but also thinner just because you get that rounding on it. Whereas the Prisma V1 is very blocky. Now, the difference in this manifests just in comfort. I prefer the Prisma Pro's handles to the Prisma V1's handles every day of the week. I'm not someone who really cares if a balisong is blocky or if it's round or anything like that. But given that I am someone who likes to fan, the extra blockiness of the Prisma V1 is just not as smooth. Don't get me wrong, it's still amazing flipping balisong. But when you fan on the Prisma Pro, it's just so much smoother. The rounding on the faces of the handles just feels great. Feels amazing. Choker fans especially feel really, really good. Whereas on the Prisma, again, they still feel good. It's just, there's just that tiny bit of you feel those corners. turning through your fingers, and it just doesn't feel the best sometimes. Again, this is a nitpick more than anything. I want to make it very clear that even though it seems like I prefer the Prisma V2, because I do, spoiler alert, the Prisma V1, considering you can get it for cheaper nowadays, is still a fantastic option for anyone looking for something in the price range. It's still really good. But getting back on track to comparisons, weights. The weight in the bottom of the handles. These are both equipped with the standard pivots. You can take them out to remove some weight. But the problem is with the Prisma V1, I almost never take the weights out of the handles because it flips. Now it really sort of feels like it has the blade bias to it. When you take that out, you can really feel that blade bias. But you lose a lot of the momentum that I think makes the Prisma good in the first place. Like, not good in the first place, but you know what I mean. You lose that momentum, and it just becomes even less sticky on Chaplains. Like, it's already a pretty sticky balisong on Chaplains. But once you remove those weights, you definitely lose a lot of that. Rollovers and Chaplains definitely lose some of their stick, and it just becomes a little bit more of a weird flipper. It's not bad, it's just I have never, ever kept the weights out of the Prisma for very long. Whereas the V2, you go from ever so slightly handle biased, mostly because of the momentum that they carry, to pretty neutral. Like, it feels really, not dead neutral, because dead neutral is a very subjective thing. We'll have to make a video about that in the future on balances and subjectivity, but it's neutral. Like, there isn't too much to my hands. Like, there isn't too much to either side. There's not too much blade bias. There's not too much handle bias. I'd call it pretty neutral. You do lose a little bit of that momentum, but it doesn't kind of kill it for me like it did in the Prisma V1. The momentum is still there enough to make an enjoyable flipping experience. I think I prefer it with the weights, as I brought up in a previous video, just because I'm learning tricks on the Prisma Pro right now, and that extra handle bias just helps me learn tricks a little easier, especially some of the aerials that I'm trying to learn. Aerial the thumb chaplain, aerial the middle finger chaplain, etc. But it's still very, very flippable without the weights. So I think that's like the main difference. Other than that, you just have like sound, which I just lubed these before starting recording. So let's do this quick little sound test. They both sound very good. The Pro just has a little bit more of like a deeper sound to it. Now, keep in mind that could also be because this is on steel washers and this is still from when the Prisma was on phosphorus bronze washers. So that genuinely could make a difference in terms of the sound. But pretty much everything else, even with that change, is virtually identical. They both have the same incredible tolerances that MachineWise is so known for. They both sound amazing. They both flip amazing. You're just looking at a bit of a difference in ergonomics, which I prefer, and a slight bit more handle bias to make it just a little bit more of a normal flipper. That's really kind of what it comes down to. I compared it last time to, I finally organized my plastic balisongs, the Calico V1.5 and the Calico V1. The Calico V1's very unique to the point where it could be weird for some people. And then this is more normal while still carrying the Calico charm. I kind of see these the same way, but much less, I don't know how to say it, much less obvious. It's just like a less extreme version of the Calico. The Prisma V1 has a little bit more of that charm, a little bit more of that blade bias, whereas this feels more like a standard, almost competitive flipper to me, which MachineWise normally doesn't like. I know Banks of Rome, who's in the Madco video, you know, Madco kind of heavy and sluggish, prefers a lot more competitive balisongs. And MachineWise isn't really his cup of tea. He prefers more like squid. Whereas I think the Prisma Pro is probably one of the more competitive flippers that Dalen makes. I could be wrong. I haven't spent an extensive amount of time with the Seraph and the Opus, so take that with a grain of salt. But you just get that little bit more normal feeling to it, and it just feels amazing. I've said in previous videos that the Prisma Pro is my favorite trainer. The Prisma V1 was definitely high up on my list, but it didn't beat things for me like the Nemesis or the, I guess like the Series V2 trainer now in my collection. But the Prisma Pro beats basically everything in its price range. I would prefer this to the Barfly line, to the Kraken trainer, to the Antarctic, Vortex, Prisma V1, etc. So there's mostly the differences with a little bit of my opinion thrown in there. Both of these are fantastic products. And they just really do stand on their own as really, really solid. The one thing that I will say is that the Prisma V1 feels a little bit more just rounded all over. Like there's definitely not any sharp angles here. Even the jimping is fairly like consistent. Whereas you do get some of that sharpness on the Prisma V2 because you have like this chamfer here as opposed to like this rounded chamfer that he does on the Prisma V1. The cutouts are a bit deeper. Or sorry, they're more shallow, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but they seem a little bit more shallow to me. They just feel a little bit sharper. This is nothing bad whatsoever. We are not talking about like the Orion. I'll get the Orion one of these days. We're not talking about like Orion level sharpness in the machining here. We're just talking about, in terms of differences, the Prisma V1 is just a little bit more smooth, I guess. I don't really know how to describe it. So yeah, those are the main differences. Both of these are amazing. Prisma V1, I have to say, if you can get one, I've seen them going on the secondhand market for as low as like 90 to $100. If you can get one for that, I would say go for it pretty much every day of the week. It is a really stellar balisong, but this, I've gushed about this in another video. So there you go. Primary differences between the Prisma V1 and the Prisma V2. If you have both of these balisongs and you want to add anything, leave a comment down below. Unless you're one of the people that is like, it's the same handles, they're the same, so the balance didn't change. No, I showed you the picture. Slightly more handle bias. I knew I wasn't crazy. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.